This is Russ Brialt with the Shroud of Turin Education Project, and on today's Shroud Report, we have a special guest, Paul Maloney, who is a research archaeologist. Paul, welcome to the Shroud Report.
Thank you very much.
You've been studying the Shroud for a long time, and one of the things we were discussing before that really interests you the most is kind of the mystery of the Shroud. Indeed, it is a mystery. And you yourself have been kind of a detective in this whole subject for a long time.
Well, I like the way you put it as a mystery and detective work, because it's truly that. My favorite part has been as a research archaeologist, and this is how I got involved, was as studying the pollen grains that were found on the Shroud. We have a man that was involved in the Shroud research from long ago, Dr. Max Fry, and he was like a detective who actually investigated the Shroud by studying the dust particles, just the plain old dust that you would see on your table. In this case, it was on the cloth. As he peered through his microscope in 1973, he said, "May I have permission to take samples of dust?" So that's what he did. He got involved with his microscope and began to examine all the particles, all the fibers that he found on the Shroud.
Just the simple dust.
Just the simple dust. Now, in that dust, he found, as I've already said, particles of linen and cotton. He found pollen grains. He found anthers from the actual centers of flowers. He found plant hairs that come from alongside the stems, as if those plants had been laid right physically on the Shroud. And he found actual insects, in this case mites. 2 mites I found from the material that he took in 1978 that are actually technically found in the floral material of the pollen grains.
So there's flowers, there's pollen, there's insects, there's hair, there's a lot of stuff.
And tiny little leaves we call bracts that are also involved.
And much of this is microscopic. You can't even see it with a human eye.
That's right. You can't see it with the naked eye. You have to have a microscope. Now here is a pollen grain. You can see the little tiny protrusions that go all the way around the pollen grain. We know that this is a floral pollen grain. That is, it comes from a flower. It doesn't come from a tree.
So pollen from a flower, okay.
And here's another one. You can see those little things that stick out from them. That's typical. If you look under a microscope and you see this kind of ornamentation on a pollen grain, you know it came from a flower. Here's a bract. This is a tiny little petal. Comes from what we call an inflorescence.
And you call it a bract?
A bract, B-R-A-C-T.
B-R-A-C-T.
Right.
Okay.
And this is the kind of thing, the narrow end is the end that was attached to the plant. And many of these would figure all the way around the plant as a tiny little flower. You'd almost have to have a microscope, at least a high-powered magnifying glass, to see the tiny flower. Goldenrod is an example of the kind of plant that this would have come from.
Okay.
Here's a plant here. Now this would have come from alongside the stem. It's the type of thing that you find if you were to lay something down on a cloth and this would break loose, this would be impregnated into the cloth.
So that's not something then that would necessarily, I mean, pollen sometimes floats in the air, but that would indicate that the flower was actually laid onto the Shroud itself?
That's right, and that's why this is so important. It's important to realize that not only the wind deposited some of the pollen grains we find on the Shroud, but also human activity, physically laying flowers down on the Shroud itself.
We're going to take a break right here, and we'll be back in just a minute.
The Shroud of Turin Education Project offers a live, big-screen multimedia presentation for all audiences. For more information on how to sponsor a presentation in your area, call 770-716-7114 or email us at shroud2000@aol.com. Check out our website at www.shroud2000.com. Help bring the mystery and the message of the Shroud to your community soon.
This is Russ Briault with the Shroud of Turin Education Project, and welcome back to the Shroud Report. And today we're talking to Paul Maloney, a research archaeologist. If there are flowers and flower images and pollen from flowers, when you think of a burial today, I mean, you send flowers to the funeral home. You put flowers on the casket, and that's a tradition that goes back thousands of years.
That's right. That's right.
And so one of the theories is that if this is the Shroud of Christ that we're talking about here, then perhaps along with spices that they brought, they also brought flowers and perhaps banked the flowers around the head of the Shroud, or maybe the entire body.
That's the first of two possibilities for human activity, the burial activity and the laying of flowers down during that activity. The second is that if this is considered by the followers of Christ later years to have been the burial cloth of Jesus, they often used flowers, particularly in the Eastern Rite, to lay flowers down on the what they call the epitaphios, literally laying the flowers down. I have a Coptic friend.
No. What is the epitaphios?
The epitaphios is a piece of embroidered cloth. Now, that's rather late in historical tradition. But the earliest cloths that we know of that were used on altars go back to at least Pope Sylvester, which would be around in the 300s A.D. And if they used flowers in that Eastern Rite,